Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frankar. It's a big week. There's a lot to get to. As always, our Tuesday show is full of too many things. So right off the bat, if you are joining us, consider joining BlueWhiteIllustrated.com because we have a big special going on right now that's always here for our YouTube audience. 2 months for $1. You subscribe at the site and you get the S Zone. That just came out hot off the presses. We'll be getting to that in just 1 minute. But the creator of the S Zone joins us on today's show, Sean Fitz. S for Sean, as you may have noticed. Fitz, how you doing?
I'm great. We didn't do the same column with Nate for other reasons, but it's a great day in Happy Valley. It's better after a win, as we've noticed in the last couple of days. But no, things seems to be rolling. We're talking a lot of recruiting on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com right now. A lot going on 2025, 2026, and even 2027 if you caught Leighton Von Brandt. I can't believe I messed that one up, committing over the weekend. So a lot going on right now. So check us out.
Yeah, Nate Bauer, get us kicked off here on our first conversation point, which is Penn State, Washington. We're going to talk about the game briefly, and then we're going to get into a bunch of different things, including James Franklin's press conference. And I promise, because we didn't get to the mailbag last week, we are absolutely getting to the mailbag this week. So Nate, as always, your thoughts and comments after the game, excellent on our instant analysis video. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have heard your comments and have given you compliments on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel in replies to the video. Yeah. Anything change, in your opinion, from last week or from last weekend to today?
I'm not sure that I remember what I said, so that's a tough jumping off point. But I think they were good. They were Penn State. Look, anybody that's not Ohio State, Penn State seems to play okay against, right? And I think that staying on the field on third downs were extremely important. Obviously, I thought that T. Frank, you and I will have this discussion maybe later. I thought Drew played okay. I didn't think he was average. I thought he was above average in his performance. And it was in a lot of ways I didn't know what to expect necessarily going into that game. And I understand there were 2 touchdown favorites. There was a lot of expectation for Penn State to blow Washington out of the water, but I wasn't quite sure about that. I wasn't quite sure how they would respond to that loss to Ohio State. So the fact that they were able to come out and be as controlling, right? I mean, that's kind of the name of the game.
Well, Nate, this season. The thing that I think was different from this week to previous weeks, to a point you've made, is they finished those drives with touchdowns. They didn't kick field goals in the first half, and that makes all the difference in the world. Where 4 points more is a massive amount in football for every single drive.
Yeah.
No, our in-game thread was just, they were stunned. Like 4 touchdowns on 4 drives. They're like, I don't know what to bitch about.
Wait, the third quarter was perfect though, because they then got to re-engage.
It really helped get those clicks back up. So we really appreciate them going back on script. But no, I mean, the efficiency was there, especially on third down. I mean, you're looking at different ways of converting different scenarios of third down, and Penn State did a really nice job with that, and they spread the ball around. I think the big takeaway here is you see the difference between Ohio State and everybody else, especially that Washington defense, which had good numbers coming into this weekend, didn't really pose as much of a threat as the numbers would have suggested. So while everyone is high off that win, and I think you should be, like, that was in terms of Penn State's fluency, I guess it would be, throughout the season. I think that first half was as good as anything. But yeah, I think it's positive, more positive steps, which you got to be happy with.
There was my problem is, like, and I wrote this in our prediction article, I expected them to do that. I thought they had to do that from just a schematic standpoint, and all the things I had to say. Very rarely, let me say this, like, very rarely do I feel going into a game like, okay, I know exactly what's going to happen in this game. And then it exactly works out that way, because you can see things on film. You hold the 2 things up next to each other and I go, Penn State has an obvious advantage here, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. And in that game, it absolutely happened. And to me, that's the good sign for this program is, based on the X's and O's and the talent, they should have dominated that game. They did. And to me, from a cut and dried perspective, that is pretty simple. But I think that part is the important part, and kind of where we're going to lead the conversation today because a 1-8 Purdue team. Does anyone? I mean, this week feels like one of those weeks where I want to know what Penn State fans are thinking about. So drop your questions in the chat. Drop your thoughts in the chat about what you're thinking about this week, because there's a lot of conversation about, I think, bigger picture stuff this week, including in the James Franklin press conference, which we'll get to here in between the lines. But I'm curious of how this past weekend sets up for all those things and what mindset it put fans in for this stretch here at the end. Now, Nate, I know you got a shout out here to start the show too.
Just saw him briefly. Matthew at Wegmans, have to say what's up and shout out to you. Appreciate you watching the show. And obviously for getting me through Wegmans in an efficient manner this morning so I could make it to our lovely show.
Matthew, you are my favorite. Thank you for getting Nate to me on time. The whole reason we were not here on time was entirely my fault. Nate was not stuck at Wegmans because Matthew was doing the Lord's work. That was just because I did something stupid behind the scenes. And apologies for being a couple minutes late, but we are going to get into the good stuff now. And the good stuff this weekend, I was at the tailgate show, Fitz, and I had multiple people stop in front of this tailgate show and say, hey, we took your recommendation. We went to Anti-Fragile. And was that good? What's your weekend scouting report from Anti-Fragile?
It was good, as you would say. Actually, we had a lot of people that came to our tailgate, the On3 tailgate, that came straight from Anti-Fragile too. So like they must have done good business based on Blue White Illustrated podcast this weekend. So really happy to hear that. And we went in, Nate and I went in on Friday to scout and do some business drinking. And it was really, really good crowd in there on Friday afternoon. We knew from the social media stuff that they put up on Friday night, it was crowded. So keep that place crowded all weekend. Penn State fans, we really appreciate it. They really appreciate it. It is a Penn State business. Like those guys went to Penn State. They really, I know Paulo was a student here, the brewer. John, the owner, was a Penn State guy. So they are Penn State through and through. That is why they're downtown. They want to be a part of the Penn State scene. And in the last several months, they've really became a big part of the Penn State scene on Calder Way. Great beer. Had a couple Pilsners on tap this weekend. Had a couple of hazies on tap this weekend. Just kind of spreading out the the position versatility, if you will.
There we go.
Tapped a new keg of porter as well. So
yes,
can't say enough about Anti-Fragile, their support of the show, our support of them, because we think that they are a business that is worth supporting with your dollars, with your patronage, all that stuff. It's really awesome. So check it out when you're in town for the Maryland weekend. And it's been a really, really good season for them, I believe, just from talking to their people. And it's been a really, really good season for our partnership. And we really do appreciate it.
Yeah, always appreciate Anti-Fragile being part of the show. And if you're a local business and you want to be a part of this show and you love, the community aspect of what we're doing, you can be an advertiser here, but join the community at large. Become a CBICC member by joining a powerful network of businesses and leaders dedicated to growing and enhancing Center County. Members gain access to exclusive resources, networking opportunities, business development tools, and a seat at the table in shaping the economic future of this region. It's not just about football. I understand football and the university are the main thing that drive everything around here, but there are other parts of the community that, thrive and live and are part of this, and we want them all to work together to build a better Center County, a better state college, because all three of us live here. We are invested in this region. So if you want to join the business after hours, they have a Global Entrepreneur Week community networking after hours program Tuesday, November 19th from 5 to 7. It's the Chamber of Commerce, CBICC. Join Penn State Small Business Development Center for the 4th annual community networking event. If there's one thing I've learned, guys, something I'm terrible at, but is the lifeblood of success, it's networking. Getting to know people, knowing people who know people who will be willing to help you out because you're a good person and you weren't terrible to them. Join that community of networking, or maybe you were and still you have something valuable to bring to the table. Join Penn State Small Business Development Center for the 4th annual community networking event. Again, November 19th from 5 to 7. Appreciate Chamber of Commerce being a sponsor here on the show and helping us grow as one of the businesses here that lives and operates in Center County. Nate, give me a couple minutes. Fitz and I got to get into the recruiting update. There's a lot of stuff going on this weekend, and we need to get his thoughts on a varied number of topics. We'll bring you back in a minute. Okay, Fitz. So first off, you're muted. Secondly, the S Zone just came out, like we said 10 minutes ago to start the show. What are we talking about in the S Zone this week? Give us a preview of what people can learn over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com if they subscribe.
We are talking about finishing off the 2025 class. Quincy Porter, Ohio State wide receiver commit, was at Penn State over the weekend. I didn't expect that. I usually have a pretty good idea of even when flip targets are coming in, and we balance that line. But when I was there after the game and James Franklin's hugging Quincy Porter, that's a bit of a surprise, and I love surprises. It's so much fun covering recruiting when there's surprises to be had, good surprises at least. So Quincy Porter on campus, wrote about him today. Wrote about the ongoing Brandon Finney saga as that continues to play itself out. He's still committed to Oregon. Penn State's still certainly heavily involved there. Michigan's still involved as well. Definitely checking that out. But really just recapping the weekend that was. It's been a busy couple of weeks for Penn State's recruiting staff, about 150 each weekend, each of the last 2 weekends, highly dense in terms of targets. I know Ryan Snyder has done a phenomenal job compiling those lists over the last couple of weeks. Those guys could probably use a nap. I'm not going to lie. It's been a busy weekend. Now, as we said, going up to the last 2 weeks is that noon kick against Ohio State gave you an opportunity to showcase, sort of the peak atmosphere. Even though it was a noon kick, this weekend probably gave you a little bit more chance to recruit. Like that's kind of the silver lining there with the 8 o'clock kick. Actually, the 8 o'clock kicked great. There's no need for linings or anything like that. Yeah. You get a chance to be around these kids, to actually recruit them, to have them get some questions answered. So it's almost more not like a junior day, but like it's a more informal visit than showing up at 8:30 for a noon kick where the team arrives
just and being processed, right?
Like it is it's a meat market for a noon kick. You got to get them in certain spots. Then afterwards, maybe you get a little bit of time to hang out. But for the most part, this is an opportunity to showcase more of the big picture, the tailgating picture. I thought the fields were awesome on Saturday. We were out there for a while. I don't know that I've ever tailgated when it's dark before. You think about Penn State has its night games. It's usually September, and it usually gets dark around 8:30 or something like that. So that was a different experience. It got colder than I expected, but that's neither here nor there. There's a lot of people that had a lot of things that help them deal with the cold. And do that
you had to go work
before going to work. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But you look at the visitor list, it was great. You had Zion Ali, the number one overall prospect on three's class of 2026 rankings, defensive end from Maryland. That has been a long-time top target. There's a guy that came to camp this summer, which I think it's a good indicator of he's actually putting in the work to figure out if he's a fit in terms of system, in terms of coaching style with Deion Barnes. And that's a positive sign, I will say. That's going to be a tough one because Oregon's in there. Ohio State's in there. Tennessee just came in. Texas A&M just came in. Auburn just came in. There's a bit of a theme there. He had a top five and he stepped back from that top five. Penn State was in that top five, and I still think they're in the mix. It's going to be a tough one for Zion. He's a heck of a football player. Maybe distance comes into play here, but Oregon, I think, is leading the way. And it's leading the way on 3 RPM right now as well. Kendra Harrison, another 5-star prospect in the class of 2026, led a merry band of tight ends that were essentially in the top 10 or 15 of the On3 industry rankings. I mean, it was kind of ridiculous in terms of the density of talent in that tight end group. So it's kind of by design, but it's more about, hey, Ty Howell's going to go out there and pitch to these guys. Come to the whiteout. We're going to have time you're going to have time to get in. You're going to have time to actually see the campus. You're going to have time to do all this stuff, and you're going to have time to travel. And that's a big deal for guys that are coming in from Iowa, Kansas. I think it was just all over the place. So yes, there's a little bit of luck in getting all those guys there, but at the same time, it's kind of by design. So the tight end group from top to bottom, I mean, as good of a position group, and you would expect that given how Penn State's recruited tight end, but as good of a position group as we've seen on one of these weekends for a long, long time. It was just kind of stupid how that all came together. So credit to Ty Howell for getting those guys onto campus. A couple of picks after the weekend. Steve Wilfong put in some picks. Caden Gebhardt, linebacker safety hybrid from Ohio, former teammate of Ethan Grunkmeyer. He's a really, really good player. He came to camp this summer as a safety. Penn State worked him out as a linebacker. I think he kind of fits that Lion Sam mold that we've seen, kind of like the Don DeLuca role that we've seen there. Probably more linebacker at this point. He's about 6'1", maybe 200 pounds right now. So he's kind of in that hybrid role, but a really good football player. He tested really well as well. You see he's a 4-star. He's top 247 guy by 24/7 Sports. And then Carter Scruggs, offensive lineman from Virginia. He's a 4-star, I think, on every network. I'm sure you'll pull that one up. But he's been a guy that's been on the radar for a while. Big kid, 6'5", 270. He's got really good length for an interior prospect, and Penn State had him in camp, so they liked him as well. So things coming out of that. That's just a couple picks from Steve there. And I think there's more to come. I think Penn State positioned themselves really well for some really good prospects. So coming out of the next few weeks, I don't know that this is the time of year where you see a rush of commitments, but I think you see some trickle out in addition to what we've already seen.
I was going to say, I wouldn't say it's a rush of commitments, but there have been a couple this weekend already, which is what we're going to end here with. And let's start with the one we haven't talked about yet, which is Leighton Von Brandt, committed to the program. Another one of these that I love, Fitz, that happens like 20 minutes before kickoff. I found out about it after the game because I was locked in on what we were doing. But again, 2027, and I know how you feel about 2027, especially for offensive linemen, but this one feels like a big commitment for Penn State 2 years out with a top interior offensive lineman committing to the program.
Yeah, he's a big kid. He's been sort of ahead of the curve in the class of 2027. And, when you're looking at the region in that cycle, and it's way too early. Like, let's not get all hung up on all these things right now. But you look at him and you look at Maxwell Hiller and you say, these are guys that Penn State needs to get. And they've gotten one of them already. We weren't really looking for a commitment coming into the weekend. As I've said on the board, like, you're not looking for 2027s right now. Penn State's not really pushing hard for 2027s right now, and that's not saying that they didn't want him on board, but they understand the gravity of the situation here. These are sophomores in high school that have a long way to go in their high school career, and we will see what happens. But now Penn State's got two commits in the class of 2027 with Leighton Von Brandt and Keemon Spell.
Can I jump in here?
What's that?
Can I just jump in here 1 second talking about it's interesting to me looking at the way that this has kind of worked out with guys committing 2 years early. You have example on both sides, Alex Birchmeyer, who has I think struggled a little bit out of the start of his career, and then you've got Cooper Cousins. Both these guys committed very early in the cycle, and Cooper Cousins has come into rave reviews and was able to play early in his career. A little bit less so recently, but I think we might see him here over the next couple of weeks. But I think it speaks to your point of even if you feel confident that it's a good football player, you don't know how this is going to go with offensive linemen, especially when they commit so young, because the development curve is big for players like that. And I guess I'm just curious where you think, specifically with Von Brandt, what you see of him now, not asking is he going to be a success or not, but does he have the earmarkers of a guy who develops on the path that you think?
I don't know. I want to see more just because of how young he is. I mean, he's pushing 6'6", 250 as a sophomore in high school. He's got the length. He's got the athleticism that sort of checks out with all those other guys that we've talked about. So, like, you feel good in the data. It's a long way from playing on a college field, though. And I know he's number 60 in the country, and Keemon Spell is, I think, number 13 in the industry rankings in the country. So 2 top 100 guys right away. But there's a long way to go, and and that's not a slight on Leighton or anything like that. But it's a process, and grabbing guys early, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't think there's a rhyme or reason to this. Penn State had Jalen Matthews committed very early as well. They've had Matthias Mega Barnwell committed early as well, and those guys unfortunately didn't work out. Actually, the first 4 commitments in the class of 2025, if I'm going by memory here. You got Matthews, you got the safety from Jersey, you got DJ McClary, the running back from Arkansas,
and Barker.
as well, Barker. None of those guys panned out, and that's unfortunately, that's kind of like something you have to talk about, the double-edged sword of this thing. So, sure. But I like Von Brandt. I think he's going to be a good player. I think he's one of those guys that fits as an interior prospect that has tackle ability and has tackle size and length and things like that. And that's what you want. You always want the tackle size. You want the tackle athleticism. You want all this stuff to be tackles. And if you can make them guards, that makes your entire line offense, your entire offensive line better.
Yeah, especially if they can start at guard and you have that position versatility. Some of the examples of other places where you get really talented freshmen and maybe it's a little easier to play as a guard to start. And like an Anthony Donko, I think he did a similar thing before moving to tackle this past year. Last thing we have here is what we talked about yesterday with Ryan Snyder on our video. You can check out the breaking news video of Chaz Coleman, but I wanted to get your thoughts on Coleman in the class of 2025, getting a player here in the final stretch run in the final month before National Signing Day, the importance you think, your opinion on him, and who he is as a football player.
We talk about the data, and we don't have the hard data on him because he didn't come to camp at Penn State or anything like that. But you look at the explosiveness that he shows on the football field, on the basketball court, all this stuff, and that's the kind of thing that Penn State covets. You look at those rankings that are up there on the screen right now. The industry has him as a 3-star, number 599 overall. We have him as a 4-star, number 213 overall. That is a gulf, especially this late in the process. This is a guy that really stepped up in the last year. Ryan Snyder had an interview with his coach. I do suggest you check that out. It's very enlightening in terms of how this process went. But he's a quarterback / defensive end. You don't see a ton of them, but you look at just the raw explosiveness, and this kid's got it. And it's really going to be interesting to see how all this comes together. It kind of reminds me of Malachi Williams, a little bit bigger than Malachi, but he's got a ton of rawness to his game, but a ton of explosion, and that's what you're looking for, especially when you take a look at this group of edge rushers that Penn State has. I think Jaden Wood's a little bit closer to playing than a lot of freshmen would be at 6'3", 225, he's going to be probably 240 by the time he gets going. But like, some of these guys are ready to play. I don't think Chaz Coleman is quite there, but you see the upside. So a nice little mix in Deion Barnes' class. And you got to remember, Max Granville's kind of part of this class as well. And he's already on campus doing some good things. So a very different scenario than we've seen, in the John Scott years. Deion Barnes a little bit more aggressive there, and they've done a nice job. I know that Kentucky wanted him. I know that Ole Miss wanted him bad. Like, there's some SEC in Chaz Coleman, even though he's from by the way, much closer than I thought. 2 hours and 56 minutes per Google, and I thought he was further than that because he's in Ohio. So so not far down the road. But I like what I've seen from Chaz Coleman. Again, I think it's going to take a couple of years before he sort of figure that kind of stuff out. But that kind of explosion off the edge, you really can't teach, and that's why our guys, Cody Belair, Charles Powers, really like this kid.
Yeah, explosion plus size, I think, is the thing where you've got guys that are explosive and they're twitchy, and they're maybe a little bit undersized, and that's Penn State is able to, carve a lane with those guys. But the ones that are almost 6'5", with the length, with all of the physical markers of a first-round defensive end in the NFL draft, and that's, why I'm so excited about his abilities, is I see all of those markers. That's huge. Yeah. We will have more, of course, talking about recruiting coming up on Thursday with our recruiting show. Now we need to get to Between the Lines, talk about James Franklin and This Week in Penn State Football.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
We haven't had a good Nate Bauer conversation in a while, of right in Nate's wheelhouse. So we're going to start with James Franklin's conversation about facilities. This conversation hasn't come up in a little bit because they've been working on, renovating Beaver Stadium and putting things in. Franklin, a little bit of a longer clip here, talks about the journey to get to this point.
One of the things I'd like to show you guys at some point is we've taken before and after pictures of everything. And I think back all the way to standing on that turf practice field, and my back was up against the fence, and you guys were asking me questions. A lot of the same people in the room were asking me questions about facilities, and that was a battle when I first got here. The turf, we weren't allowed to use the turf because it hadn't been replaced in 10 years, our turf field. It is changed. And again, very appreciative of the support that we've gotten over 11 years, but I would say in the last 3 years, it's been different. And I would say specifically in the last year and a half, it's been different, because the first year and a half, when you get on campus, you're just trying to kind of figure it all out. And once they were able to figure it all out, we are getting the type of support at a level that I think this place demands.
Nate, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot that I had to cut out because the answer was very long and very in-depth, but I want you to take us down the journey of what's behind the conversation here, or what you took from that conversation.
Yeah. James Franklin is very appreciative of Pat Kraft being all in on football, and the not subtle context and undertone to that is Sandy Barber was not. And so all of the things that have been, I think there's a broad misunderstanding or lack of understanding within the Penn State community of how much external factors beyond the walls of the football program play a part in its success. Yes, it is directly things like the quality of the facility, right? So the actual physical, tangible fields, right? The locker room, all of those things that you show to recruits. But it's so much more beyond that really demanded someone caring to kind of cut through the red tape and, right, things like admissions. Nobody thinks about admissions, right? Mm-hmm. That's not a thing that's on the tip of anyone's tongue at the tailgate, right?
Excuse me. You've been around our board in early January when they're trying to get a transfer portal guy in. Yeah,
you do, but it does not come up. It does not come up at the tailgate, and that's the whole point. That is the whole point of everything that he said yesterday. Is right for Pat Kraft, and again, this is something that I think is so fascinating to me looking at this from 50,000 feet. Is right. James Franklin got booed in the stadium on Saturday night. When his name popped up on the pregame intros, right, he was on the field. He heard that. There was no mistaking it. Drew Aller's name got read. Cheers. James Franklin, head coach, Penn State football. Boo! Right? And so, there's probably a debate to be had about what portion or percentage of the stadium was doing that. But any dissatisfaction that is expressed by Penn State fans to that end is just wildly disproportionate and not shared by Penn State's administration because they understand Pat Kraft, right? And that's really what James Franklin was saying yesterday is Pat Kraft came in, and the timeline right now is Pat Kraft has been at Penn State and his administration, the people around him, Vinny James, right? All of those guys that are in athletics administration. Neely Bendapudi has been at Penn State for 3 years plus. But by the time that they got settled, figured out the ins and outs, figured out what was going right, what wasn't going right or well, the timeline of Penn State really operating at the level that it's currently operating at is like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And so that is a critical context. Penn State's administration does not boo for James Franklin. They think he's doing an outstanding job. They think that the program is on an outstanding trajectory. And so you've got this massive disconnect between what fans see as 11 years of right almost getting there, and James Franklin isn't the guy, and
specifically he's the reason. That is what that says is that everything else is fine. The coach can't coach is what that is, because again, the people who are showing up on Saturdays and tailgating, they're not all the ones here in the chat. They're not Stephen Light. They're not Kyle K, who has this to say, says all booing was drunk, idiotic college kids who know nothing about football. And I want to ask you guys, and Fitz, if you want to jump in here, I was not at the game. I did not hear or see these things. But I have been having this conversation in my head of how much of the fan base does feel this way. How much does that outside pressure do anything to any of the timelines that Nate is talking about? Because it is not insignificant that the people going to the game, the most dedicated to go to the game, pay for all of the things that go around that, are also displeased. So I guess what is the percentage that you would feel? Or was it half, some, not as many? Can you give us context? Because that was not for any of us that were not there at the stadium. It wasn't on the broadcast, wasn't anywhere else to be found.
I don't know about a percentage. We didn't have the windows open, so you kind of felt it from the student section to our right, but also like it was kind of like the wave. It just kind of like once I think people heard other people booing, they were like, "Oh, I can do this," yeah, and then it just kind of went from there. And now it's a 4-second clip here, like that. That's what we're talking about. But you saw some of that, and you're like, oh, everybody's frustrated too, and I can do this now. But no, I think it was not insignificant. It was, not particularly knowledgeable, but it was not insignificant. So, Nate, you're laughing really hard.
Nate, what do you think?
This is your lane. I know this.
It unlocks or taps into the crazy part of James Franklin's brain, as far as I'm concerned, right? The part of, he took so personally the booing of Sean Clifford before the whiteout game when Penn State was 5 right. They had just lost a game to Michigan. This was 2022. It was very evident that he took that very personally, even though it was directed at Sean Clifford. In this case, it's directed right at him.
Yeah.
And they are on a trajectory to reach the playoff, to probably host a home playoff game, right? There are aspirations and things that Penn State has an ability to get to this year that they really haven't done in his time as Penn State's head coach. And so there's just this very interesting chasm between fan perception at times. And again, it's not all fans.
I want to jump in here though, Nate, because listening to some national podcasts or listening or being on the internet, it's not just the fans. Like, the perception of the program and of James Franklin is that of the angry fans. It is that, this is it's fine. He can beat up on Maryland, and Maryland might actually be decent this year. But my point is, like, the games he's going to win are the games that don't matter, and the games he's going to lose are the big games that we've seen him lose for 11 years. I know you're adding the context, and you have the full picture of things. People don't care about the full picture. They care about what's easy to say and what's easy to repeat. And so I guess to me, that's the interesting thing, is the perception and the damage done by all of the things that happened outside of James Franklin's control. I guess I don't even know what the question is. It's just to point out that this is not an isolated thing. And I guess the longer term question is, does that shorten the leash and the timeline of support plus production?
No. And that's again, like, that's kind of the thrust of this is, Pat Kraft, right? The opposite side of everything that James Franklin said yesterday is that Pat Kraft and athletics have expectations of him. They have expectations of how the program is run and the success that it is supposed to have, given the fact that James Franklin is receiving the type of support and commitment that hasn't been present in the past. But the disconnect is Penn State fans see it as an 11-year thing, and athletics administration sees it as a 1.5-year thing. Right. A 2-year thing. Like, there were a lot of sleepless nights for everybody in Penn State football, administration, athletics, you name it, after that Ohio State game. But it is not such a backlog on their minds of, like, baggage as it is to fans. And so it's just one of those things where there is very little influence that the fan sentiment to that end has on his performance or what they think of him, etc.
It's interesting because that does have an effect on NFL teams, because they are owned by usually a single controlling entity, whether that's a person or, a group of persons. So that does work in other, and that's why I wanted to ask this question and clarify this conversation, because when you have an owner who can meddle and an athletic director maybe is the direct interpretation of that, it's just a different dynamic in college football, and one that understanding that perception of the situation is important, because it does influence this conversation in the context of the booing fans aren't going to get what they want unless something drastically different happens than what has happened previously. Let's move on to the next conversation, because we got to get to the mailbag here in just a little bit. Fitz, red shirt conversation or Keem Beeman? Dealer's choice here.
Just pick whichever's first up in your clips there. I don't know. We can
some guys, that I would say fall in that category right now is Corey Smith and Tysier Denmark, Egan Boyer and Donnie Harbor, Xavier Gilliam, Max Granville, Jalen Harvey, Anthony Specca, Belgrave Shorter, Woosley, and Mitchell. Some of those guys, it'll be this game. Some guys, it'll be next game. But the guys that have only played in one game, they're good to go. The guys that have played in 2 games, we'll probably try to hold them for another game. I think, Terry is a pretty good example with Kenny and John. He rotates them every other game. And last week it was Kenny's time to be ready to go if the game presented an opportunity. So he was able to get in there. So he's played 2 games. John's only played 1.
So unpack this for us. James Franklin really set the tone by talking about the red shirt conversation. I believe bringing it up initially in his opening statement of going to see more of these guys down the stretch. So I guess what did you take from that particular strain of the conversation yesterday and what it means for what we're going to see over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's gone to plan, which does not always happen. You take a look at all the injuries that Penn State has had, and they haven't had to supplant that with freshmen, which is definitely a good thing. I mean, obviously, Luke Reynolds is playing probably a lot more than he would have if Andrew Rappelier is still in there. But for the most part, you kind of get what the roadmap was in August, where you have 2 guys at a position, say defensive end, Max Granville and Jalen Harvey, and you can get sort of alternating games out of them. Corey Smith and who looked really good, by the way, the other night. Corey Smith and Quentin Martin also at running back as well. So like you've got these opportunities to sort of, just spread them out and keep that red shirt year. They want to keep that red shirt year on him. He talked about his philosophy on that a little bit, although it's a bit antiquated, that the whole red shirt process is a bit antiquated, but at the same time, it's still part of the process and you got to work with that. So I think they've done a nice job with that. I'm curious to see down the stretch if we see more of, the cornerbacks that he talked about, Belgrave Shorter, who's playing safety now on special teams, just sort of working into that to get these kids sort of going out on a high at the end of the season or at the end of the year, because you think about, hey, John Mitchell's from Florida, Belgrave Shorter's from Florida. You want them feeling pretty good about themselves heading into the offseason, especially with the portal the way it is. You saw it with King Mack last year. That's kind of how the flip side of that. So done a good job. I was curious to see or hear Donnie Harbor's name. That was an interesting because I think everybody on that list we've talked about, like on BlueWhaleShow.com through the bye week, all that kind of stuff we talked about. And Donnie Harbor was probably the newest name that sort of caught my attention. He's playing right guard right now, and he's done a nice job just based on, checked in with some people yesterday, just based on his relative progress. I mean, he's not going to go supplant anybody and take anybody's job or anything like that, but where he came in, the weight has always been an issue over the last couple of years, but you saw the footwork under it. You saw the potential under it. I think he's starting to come around to that. And like I said, I don't know that he's a guy this year or even next year, but you see some of the base standard that they have for their interior offensive lineman, and Donnie's done a nice job. So kudos to him for working his way through there. It's not easy to do as a freshman offensive lineman. We've heard Egan Boyer's name a bunch, but I think it's kind of the opposite there. Egan Boyer came in at 255 pounds or whatever it was, and there's clearly a leap that he needs to make to be physically there. But if you're feeling good about potential redshirt freshman offensive lineman, you're feeling good about that 2 deep at tackle next year, where you're getting Donka back, which, by the way, I think Donka looked a good deal better this week. And when he's healthy, I think he's going to be a really, really good player. Shelton has been better. Nolan Rucci's still around. And all of a sudden you put Egan Boyer as your backup left tackle, gives you an opportunity to maybe move Javen Williams inside next year. So you're just getting more flexibility the earlier that you get those guys rolling. Of course, Cooper Cousins is going to be back. So you're feeling actually pretty decent, considering that offensive line will have some moving parts, but not as many as you would think. So that depth overall is really come around. Yeah.
And it's something that building that depth and having that competition so that the best possible outcome happens has been, again, a conversation of 10 years at Penn State to rebuild the depth and find the right coach, and all the way back to the conversation you and I had about recruiting and Leighton Von Brandt and all of the players they've gotten to have commitments and interest in the program that have tackle talent and have overall talent has been a change, I'd say, since Phil Troutwine got here. So the long arc of this story feels like it's swinging the right way for Penn State, especially along that offensive line. Let's wrap this up. Anything to discuss with the Hakeem Beamon situation? We were one of the first to put it out there. Hakeem Beamon no longer with the Penn State football program. Nate or Fitz, who wrote that? And is there anything else you want to add to that conversation, Fitz?
No, it was, kind of a surprise to the staff. He came in last Sunday, I believe it was, cleaned out his locker, and he was gone. And there's not much more to that. Didn't get in trouble, to my knowledge at least. And he's moved on with his life as far as we know. James Franklin was very complimentary of him and the family and things like that. I know that they've fought that battle for him in the past. And
yeah,
I think everybody was kind of shell shocked there for a second, but got to move on and got to keep going. And now what do you do? Because Izzard didn't play over the weekend. He was injured, listed as questionable on the report, did not play. So maybe a little bit more Ty Blanding. Xavier Gilliam is a guy that was highlighted yesterday by James, and you're just gonna have to fill that gap. And Beeman had kind of slipped in the rep count and did some nice things this year. As I said before, he was responsible for that pick six at Wisconsin.
yeah.
But I think with Alonzo Ford moving up and some of those other guys playing well, Devon Elley's playing well right now as well. I think that's something that probably went into that decision.
All right. Well, let's get into what our fans have to say. If you've got a question in the chat, throw it in here. It's time for the BWI Mailbag. Okay, so let's get to this particular question. We're going to start about the receivers because a lot of people are very excited about what happened this past weekend with a lot of receivers getting targets, a lot of production. Julian Fleming got his first touchdown at Beaver Stadium as a Nittany Lion. So Poncho 570 says, regardless of the opponent or the feel-good moment for Julian, how big of a confidence boost could it be to serve the room since it's been quite a few games since any of them caught a touchdown? Lots of production. Trey Wallace was involved early. Nate, when it comes to confidence and getting this particular group going, I have some very strong opinions on this, but I want somebody who isn't just so focused on the X's and O's to give me the broader context of feeling good about yourself and making plays because you have that confidence. Do you think that that's a real thing that can happen for this particular group?
No. No.
Oh, damn it. I should have asked before we went on air because I agree.
So.
I agree.
Yeah. I think Omari Evans' lack of production is a problem. I do.
Yep.
I think that Penn State's the long completion reception was 28 yards on Saturday. And I'm not saying that you have to have 55-yard receptions every game. That doesn't have to happen. Yeah. But it's just not the level of explosiveness that Penn State wants or needs to have. It is right. And I think you talk about this season as a whole, and there's so much window dressing from Andy Kotelnicki and all that stuff. Right. That is what his offense is. Mm-hmm. But also I think that the numbers bear out more explosive at Kansas than they have had at Penn State this season. And so the thing that he was brought to deliver for a variety of reasons, right, including some of their most explosive players, including the offensive line, have not been healthy this season. Yeah. Right. And so that is problematic. So look, Trey Wallace, 5 catches for 84 yards. That's good. Right. Julian 2 for 19, Liam Clifford 1 for 20. Right. Yep. There's still not the level of involvement and production out of those receivers as Penn State needs to have. Right. Here's the thing. Not only can Penn State get by, Penn State has built this identity around being a powerful team, I think, on both sides of the ball. And that's a great thing. Like that's good to own that and to be to feel like you know who you are and then to lean into that. All of that is fine and well, but there's a complementing piece that helps that, which is to have explosiveness in the passing game, even the threat of it. And I'm not sure that that's bearing itself out right now. And it's something that they need to make strides towards coming down the stretch.
There's 3 questions here that kind of all link together. So I'm just going to read them out loud, and then Fitz, I'm going to have you jump in here. So we start with the conversation about the receiver production, followed up by Dave asks a long question here, thoughtful question. He says, thoughts on improved wide receiver play from this weekend. From my view in the seats, Washington played very little press coverage, allowed them to get open as compared to Ohio State. It was really surprising to see this from Washington, in my view, given that the receivers have struggled to get open all year against press coverage. This is what I was trying to say, is like, this should be a good matchup for Penn State. This should be one where Drew Aller dominates through the air. And they don't adjust. They really don't adjust all that much. That is their mindset at the Washington defense. From what I saw from them, they run what they run, and they think they're going to be better than you from a schematic. And it just was not a good matchup for them. And they haven't played good quarterbacks and good receivers to expose some of those schematic problems coming from an NFL thinking to a college thinking. That's what I was trying to say all week. Plus, what Drew Aller does, backside digs against cover 3, that is his bread and butter. And then this question here from Spitty says, I feel really good about after Saturday night. If Penn State wants to have the run into the postseason that all Penn State fans want, what needs to fall in place? Who needs to come back? Who needs to keep progressing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fitz, from my perspective, and what Nate hit on there is, it's the explosive plays in the offense overall, but not seeing those explosive plays against that pass defense was the part I was concerned about coming out of the game, where, yes, it was good overall, comprehensive, but they didn't get those explosive plays that should have been there. And maybe there were a couple of opportunities Drew Aller turned down. How do you view this conversation? So take us home on this question here from Spitty. What needs to happen, in your opinion, for Penn State to get to that level of being playoff caliber to threaten for a real meaningful run?
I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. First, with the feeling good about coming off of Washington, the performance against Washington, I think you do feel good, but maybe a bit of a false sense of security there. Like, it was kind of the same way we felt going into Ohio State, is if they could be those guys, that they were enough at that point. And then they played Ohio State. They weren't enough. So, like, I don't think anything has changed there. Like, I don't think you need to get ahead of yourself. I mean, they can do it against Purdue. They can do it against Minnesota. They can do it against Maryland, all that stuff. But the standard is the standard. And we see what the standard, or how different the standard is when you talk about Ohio State's defense against all these other teams that they've played. Beyond that, confidence can help, but it's not going to do it all. A running game can help even more, and an explosive running game. So who do you get back? You get back Nick Singleton. That helps. I think Nick looked better in the first half this week in terms of just going, that's kind of his thing, is to just, when he can play like a freshman and think less and go, he can do some great things. And I think that that's what they need over the last couple of weeks of the season to maybe open some things up. I agree with Nate in that Omari has been a non-factor, and that there have been scarce opportunities, but still opportunities. And I'd still like to see him take that shot, not just to chuck it deep, just the argument, but like, maybe try and open some things up. But I mean, I think it's a combination of things. Drew had a ton of time to work on Saturday night.
Yes.
The interesting thing there, the NFL defensive scheme showed up, but you got to have the right guys to be able to make that work. Washington lost its best corner, 8 plays into the game on defense. Like, that's a big deal. And I think that probably contributed to it as well. So I think there's just a lot of plays, and I think I would caution on getting too high based off of that performance against Washington. Good performance. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they didn't make the most of some of those opportunities, especially on a play like Trey Wallace coming back to the sideline. I think that was late in the first half. Maybe that was in the 2-minute drill where he came back to the sideline, made a heck of a catch on a great throw from Aller. But it's those little things that you got to keep chipping away when your tight end when your tight end is still your top guy. It's going to have a trickle down effect on those receivers. And I think they're probably going to continue to struggle against big time competition, because I think they are what they are.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things in the chat that I'll get to here in a second. But Nate, I want your follow-up thoughts on Singleton, situation with the run game. I guess, what do you think they need to do? And it seems like we're focusing on the offense, because that has been the part that has been kind of fits and starts so far this year, of not playing with consistency. So from your perspective, what are the things that they need to do in order to get to that level that they want to be in this context?
Go backwards like 4 months in health, and snap your fingers and have a bunch of stuff that has gone wrong not happen.
So let me ask you this then. Let me ask you this. I'm not asking for any sort of like injury update from you, but somebody asked me this before the game. They said, what does Penn State need? Basically the same question. I said, it is what it is because Nick has been playing through whatever ailed him after that Illinois game, and he hasn't shown the same power through contact. He is still fast. He can still get into the open field. I think they've done more to get him in the open field so he doesn't have to run through contact as much. But then he looks a little bit better in that game. Is this something that you think from that health perspective, they can get to a point over the final couple games if they do boat race Purdue, get some of the reps off him? Is there a place where health is in their favor heading into December?
I think it's possible. I think it's possible with Nick, certainly. And look, James Franklin said it yesterday that Nick has been learning to play through something, right? Like that's a thing, right? Is you have something happen and it's uncomfortable and it hurts and it's hard to get through. And then you just kind of keep going, and week by week, it gets a little bit better. And I think that they've tried to manage him, right?
Yeah.
To be able to get him back into that space. But then look, at the same time, he obviously took a shot to the head on Saturday night, right? He got a bell rung, whatever you want to call it. I don't know that it rose to the level of concussion, but in either case, it's just been this series of like cuts, right? It's not death, but it's not a season-ending thing. But there have just been all of these setbacks that I think have made consistency and timing and all of that stuff reach its full potential with these guys this season, specifically Nick. And considering where he falls in the paradigm of importance for Penn State's offense to have that explosiveness, that's a major thing to be missing, right?
Yes.
You can't say it enough. You can't overstate how important he is at full health, being his best self. And I think that that's been a problem for Penn State, really on both sides of the ball for most of this season. But it doesn't mean that over the next couple of weeks, with what should be a fairly light trip at Purdue, right? A game against Minnesota that looks a lot more manageable after their loss to Rutgers, and then Maryland. Like Penn State. Here's the reality: Penn State is facing the two bottom teams in the Big Ten standings over the next 3 weeks.
Yeah,
in Maryland and Purdue. So there should be opportunities to get into better shape. Plus the break, the layoff, right? Not playing in the Big Ten championship game, and then you've got another 3 weeks after that before you play again in the playoff.
As it stands right now, there is obviously, I assume that there's still a path where if Oregon falls apart and Ohio State and Indiana all fall apart, or at least two of those three, Penn State could still be in the conversation, but it is most likely that they are not. I don't even know why I'm bringing it up. I don't know why I'm bringing it up because it's so unrealistic. Fitz, I guess, how do you feel about that idea of getting healthy at the right time? Talk about this in the NFL all the time too, of like, you just get guys back at certain points and they get their feet under them. And then the playoffs, you are a different team because you have different pieces that you might not have had in the regular season. It is a long, hard game to play to stay healthy the whole time. So do you think that is an opportunity for Penn State to get healthy and get right heading into, where they want to go?
Yes, there's an opportunity to get healthy, get right. Guys like Keon Wiley, making their way back. Maybe Zariah Fisher, at the end could be, you look at Penn State's depth at defensive end, it's not incredible anymore. So, maybe that would help. But they're also in the same boat as pretty much everybody in college football. Like, this is not an isolated incident. Penn State's had injury issues throughout the season. I mean, since the start of camp, really. But I think everyone else has too. We're kind of living our little bubble where we see one team with injury update or one team with injuries and another team is, fine, but it's not that case. It's November in the Big Ten. Everybody's hurt. Like, that's kind of how I look at it.
Okay. So the last question here from this, I guess I'll go to this into the chat from Ryan, if I can find it here. He asked earlier about Drew Aller and is he turning down shots in the offense? It's never as clear as like, yes, he is always turning things down. But I view Aller as a guy on the path to be an NFL quarterback. So what are the throws he needs to make to show me he's on that path? What are the throws that NFL quarterbacks make either in college or at the next level? And I'm not saying he has to do all these things right now, but he needs to be on that path and understanding his talent and the context of aggression. And I think he's still on the conservative side. That may just be his personality. That may just be who he is as a quarterback. That doesn't ever change. No, like for the rest of his career, however long that lasts. There were 3 plays, I would say, in the first half where there was an opportunity for a deep shot. 2 to Amari Evans. 1 was an intermediate route where he checked it down, where he has the arm talent to throw it over that linebacker, to put it in an NFL window to Tyler Warren, who could then catch and run on a deep crosser for, 25 yards. There are times that these 16-play drives don't have to go 16 plays because he can rip off a chunk of yards and make it feel more dominant, make it feel like they're on their front foot. But he and this offense play to be ahead of the sticks. James Franklin talks about that on every single conversation point of third down. These shots that they're taking are also coming on second and medium. And when they are on first down, Aller makes the decision to check the ball down. So there is a certain amount of this is what they're asking him to do. And there's a certain amount of he has the latitude to make the final call. Sean Clifford was coached the same way, I would assume. Sean Clifford let it rip. Like he threw the ball into those windows, right or wrong. And whether or not the window was actually there, Aller knows where the windows are. From that perspective, from that mentality, the understanding of the defense, he is a step above the quarterbacks that Penn State has had from a mental processing post-snap. He has the ability to do this. That's what I want to see from him. That takes this offense to the next level, irrespective of the receivers getting demonstrably better in every situation. And I guess that's where part of this conversation lies, in this gray area of what's Aller, what's the overall idea of the offense. And if you want to say, and I'll wrap up with this, if you want to say that there is an influence from James Franklin and the coaching staff on the game plan, to me, it's this idea of being safe with the football and making sure you're in position to win the game and not turn the ball over. And that's where I think, if you want to say those things about Franklin meddling, which I don't think that's meddling, that's just coaching. That's where it lies with me. He's not calling plays on fourth down at the goal line against Ohio State. So I know I just talked us into like a dead end, but do you have any thoughts there, Fitz?
That it worked on Saturday. And I get the difference between Washington and Ohio State and everything like that. But you look at the staying on schedule plan, it worked. Penn State's longest third down was 3rd and 8. And that was the Julian Fleming touchdown pass. Like, that is a remarkable place to be. Penn State's average down and distance on third down was 4.4 yards.
Great.
I don't want to say it's unheard of, because I'm sure it's happened before, but like, that's really, really good. And I think a lot of that has to do with what you just talked about, sort of the risk averse nature. There were a couple times when he had a drag route, he pulled it down and got 4 or 5 yards. Like, that's what Franklin was talking about last week, and we kind of overreacted to. Don't throw the scary interception or whatever. But it's part of how it's being coached. It's part of, I think, the personality of Drew. And I think it worked really well on Saturday. That's the counter argument here, is like, it did a pretty good job with that.
Yeah. And I'm trying to, this is always tough, because I'm not trying to place blame on anything or say that anything is wrong. I'm trying to paint the picture and characterize things correctly, or at least the best we can interpret it based on what we see, not knowing, not being at practice, not being in every meeting. Last thing here, I know it's gonna be a bit of a tone shift, but Fitz, I'm coming back to you for this one. Beaver Hill has an awesome question, and something, if we can just like take a breath for a second. Playing Washington this week got him excited, thinking about how cool their tailgate setup is with the stadium right next to the water, boat tailgating. If you guys could travel, tailgate, and attend a college game at a non-PSU stadium, where would you be going, Fitz?
I would have a ton on that list, because I love college football and I love the atmosphere of those things, and I would love to do them without working, even though I'm very spoiled and have a job watching football like that. I understand that that's a comment that I'm throwing out there and nobody cares. But Washington is definitely on the list. It depends on the time of year. Washington and Oregon are two on my list that I definitely want to get to. I've never been to Nebraska. That's one that's certainly on my list because I just hear wonderful things about the people there. I've actually never been to Wisconsin either, which is kind of a shot against me. Like I should have been at Wisconsin this time. But in the Big Ten, those are the kind of the four that stick out. I'm unfortunately not going to West Lafayette this weekend, but that was sarcasm.
So you're going to be on the post-game show?
We'll talk about that later.
Okay.
But the three that really jump out to me, and it's not, I don't want it to be 90 degrees here, but LSU, Ole Miss, and Alabama are the three that I really regret not going to Alabama back in the day. And those are the three that really jump out to me because I've heard wonderful things about them.
Nate, if you're going to take a trip to watch a college football game, where's the best golf that you can do before or after for your specific tailored tailgating weekend experience?
Yeah, I'd like to go to Arizona State. Yeah, no, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't like the tailgate thing and all, I haven't done it. It's been so long, right? It's been 20 years since I've been a football, like a college football fan, like got to act like a fan for a college football game. So, yeah, I don't know. I like it all. I do like, I'm looking forward to Northwestern's stadium.
That's the one I had in my mind.
Right.
Well, specifically their makeshift nonsense one. I'm looking I want to do that before the new stadium. And I believe in 2 years Penn State is out there. So
for now,
that'd be fun.
until the Big Ten adds another ACC team or something like that in the future and the schedule gets all changed. But that's for another day. Nate Bauer, Sean Fitz, excellent job today. As always, we'll be back tomorrow with more from Blue White Illustrated, BWI Live, 10 a.m. Same time. We're going to have this conversation, talk about more stuff, preview practice. The show never stops, except for literally right now when it has to stop. We'll talk to you later.